Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Underground. This is the briefing for Tuesday, September 28th, 2021, and it is being recorded the day prior on the 27th. So let's get right to it with the weather. Weather over the next 12 hours is going to be quite significant on the West Coast, with lots of systems bringing in a lot of precipitation of all different kinds and all kinds of cloud ceilings that are going to be really low to the ground. So for any kind of asset, aviation, unmanned, or otherwise, it's going to be not good flying off the West Coast for the next 12 hours. And remember, as we move forward into the later parts of the year, the days start getting shorter and we have more hours of nighttime to play with. So, for at least the East Coast for tonight, the end of evening nautical twilight is going to be at 7:52 p.m. We're also going to have pretty good lunar illumination for this cycle. We're at a 65% illumination level. And throughout the rest of the country, really the only other place that's going to have some trouble with some low-level clouds is the Northeast as they start to get some of that winter weather coming their way. And as we can see here, moving into this slide, I changed it just for this week just to show the precipitation off the West Coast is going to be really bad for any kind of aerial operations, as well as little spots up there in New England, which are going to prohibit or be very unlikely for any kind of aerial surveillance operations, again, if it were to be a factor, just to get everybody in the mindset of seeing wind directions and how these prevailing winds actually work out. Moving into NOTAMs, really nothing significant to report for this brief. It's not the weekend, so we don't have the presidential one to talk about, and there's really nothing else going on. There are a few standard ones that have been up, but you can go check them out if you're interested in learning more about NOTAMs. And for our civil unrest forecast for this briefing, there's really not that many changes. Really, the only one I wanted to highlight is number 4 there in Phoenix, Arizona, where the election audit is ongoing. That election audit, as everyone has probably heard by now, is heating up quite significantly, and I'm personally guessing that the results of the forensic audit will be released in their entirety after this brief goes out, but probably before the next one. So that's something to be aware of as we're going to have to come back to once things become a bit more clear on that front. And for logistics, a quick rundown of the shortages from last time. As always, over here on the left side of the map, you can see the list of shortages that are impacting the nation as a whole. Really no major changes on that front. And again, from last brief, we're still tracking school bus driver shortages in the states depicted on the map. We're also tracking the microchip shortage as is starting to impact things about the same as it has been over the past few weeks and months, which is to say quite significantly. We're also seeing public transit driver shortages in the states that are depicted. Same thing from last time. Really, the only thing new to add is Costco shortages. So Costco, the company, has restricted toilet paper and bottled water again. They're saying that they're facing shortages in those arenas. So it's unclear as to where in which stores they're going to be having shortages at. But my guess is, since this has now hit the news, probably all of them. So Costco claims that their shortages are due to both inflation and supply chain issues, which is a good excuse. But we here don't know if this is true or not. This could be a case of a company claiming that there is a shortage to cause a run on their products and drive demand up in the short term. So, of course, we've been tracking inflation seriously affecting things, along with a widespread paper shortage. But nothing has specifically indicated to us that there was a shortage looming for Costco specifically. So again, like last time, the shortage of bottled water and toilet paper, we predicted that one quite easily, along with a lot of other people, because it was very easy to see because news media articles were spinning a story that the virus that cannot be named caused digestive issues. So that was the reason which spun up all the news media over the toilet paper shortages. And then once they started reporting that, well, then it just became a snowball, a logistical nightmare. So we're not seeing that this time, other than a normal paper shortage that we've been dealing with for months now. We're not seeing a specific coherent event that is resulting in Costco being completely out of all their stuff. Sure, shortages have been happening, but it's not like there was one really inflammatory event that occurred to cause Costco to have these widespread outages. So until we get more information on that, I guess it really doesn't matter in the long run. because there are shortages now. So who knows? The chain of causation here isn't really determinable because we just don't have inside access to Costco's supply data. So just know that if you shop at Costco, there will almost certainly be shortages on random things, probably toilet paper and water and other things as well, as people go there to stock up on stuff. So there's going to be shortages now, and other stores are almost certainly going to be affected as well as these shortages spread to other big box stores from the demand being so high. And moving into critical infrastructure concerns, really the biggest one to talk about is the Crystal Valley ransomware attack. So, the Minnesota based Crystal Valley Agricultural Co op was hit with a ransomware attack a few days ago, actually, almost immediately after the NEW cooperative, the new cooperative, was hit down in Iowa, much the same way. As far as impact, this attack has shut down operations for the co-op and is affecting about 2,500 farmers in Minnesota and in northern Iowa in various ways that we can't really get a feel on. For instance, this co-op maintains fueling stations for agricultural vehicles and things like that, which are having issues taking payments from credit cards. So far, that's really all the info we have regarding impacts. This co-op has been really tight-lipped about exactly what systems are currently offline or were impacted, but we expect to know more as this incident continues. The ransomware attack actually occurred back on September 19th, and the media, local media at least, became aware a couple of days after that. So far, there isn't any indication as to if their systems are back online or if anything's been resolved or what. We haven't seen a statement either way at this point. So again, just like last brief, this cyber attack highlights an increased effort for ransomware attacks and other kinds of cyber attacks against our critical infrastructure. And with the highly computerized nature of agricultural operations these days, these attacks, broadly speaking, will be a significant threat in the near future. A lot of people don't know how advanced agricultural operations have become, which is both good and bad. But these cyber attacks quite clearly highlight the vulnerabilities. When a farmer can't even turn the ignition and start up his tractor without the tractor having a GPS or cellular connection, and when a field cannot be irrigated without the automated management system sending the data through some server halfway around the country, this presents a lot of vulnerabilities for our food supply, especially in an age of cyber attacks. Moving into significant governmental actions, first up is Delta Airlines. So, Delta Airlines has made themselves a no-fly list, which is separate from the national no-fly list, which honestly itself warrants further investigation if you want to go down the rabbit hole and get extremely angry in the process, because it's really infuriating to realize the details of no-fly lists in general. But Delta has been keeping their own separate no-fly list for political reasons. They have been kicking people off flights for not complying with their mandates, which again make absolutely no sense if you actually read them. But since the federal government hasn't put people on their national security no-fly list for these mandate violations, Delta has again proven themselves willing to go above and beyond to follow laws that do not exist and even make up their own no-fly list that is just for them. And Delta wants other airlines to share their lists too, if they have them, to create a national no-fly list that is separate from the federal no-fly list. This is just among the airline companies themselves, right? So as infuriating as this is, it is also quite an interesting look into the strange field of certain kinds of companies, and airlines are a fantastic way to learn a lot of information. For instance, we have talked a lot in the past about private companies that are technically private companies, but they go above and beyond to follow laws and rules that do not exist, simply to gain favor with the federal government. A good example of this in the past has been companies that sell night vision devices. Some companies make you sign a stack of waivers, scan a copy of your driver's license, and a bunch of other stuff. None of which is federal law, by the way. All you've got to do to own night vision in America is just follow ITAR rules, which basically means don't export it. But other than that, there really isn't that much regulation, right? So Other companies don't make you sign anything at all, and you just click the add to cart button on the website and check out like normal, like you're just buying something like normal. Federal ITAR laws say nothing at all about scanning a driver's license. It is on the consumer, not the company, to comply with ITAR laws. But some companies go above and beyond to require things that are not actually required by the federal government. Thus, the airlines. Airline companies were the first ones to require medical passports, even before the federal government got involved. They did that on their own. So, again, this is infuriating, I get it, but it's also a great opportunity to see exactly which airlines and companies will go down this unique path and eagerly be the tip of the spear when it comes to medical mandates, and not just a hesitant complier who's complying because they have to or the government will shut their business down. It really just highlights the spectrum of willingness to comply with the federal mandates, and it looks like especially Delta Airlines is right at the tip of that spear. And speaking of medical mandates, moving on to number 2, the Biden regime has stated in various cryptic press statements that they are mandating the medical procedure for all federal contractors. Again, we don't know exactly how this is going to go down because we haven't seen the exact wording of these mandates, and we might not see it for a while. The Biden regime is clearly full steam ahead on using tactics like regulations instead of full-on executive orders. Executive orders are clear and concise and can easily be overturned by a court. But getting some minor regulatory agency to verbally pressure the companies they regulate, that's a lot harder to battle in court. That's why Biden is going through OSHA to mandate the jab for private businesses. If that were an executive order, a federal judge could easily stop it, at least temporarily. But if it were a rule change, which by the way, Biden is extremely famous for during his tenure in the Senate, if you followed his career before he even became vice president, he was very famous for this. It's a lot harder to sue, and it's a lot harder for a judge to stop because it's not as simple as placing a hold on something, right? So again, this incident is interesting because we don't know how many federal contracting companies have already, many months ago, gone above and beyond to comply with a medical mandate that didn't exist yet, but now does, right? So we might have some companies have very little change to their workforce because they already thinned the herd months ago. Or we might have some companies quietly not push the issue because they can't afford to lose their workforce, especially with gigantic federal contracts on the line. So again, we have very little data on this, so I guess we'll just have to see how it goes, but it will certainly be interesting to follow. And moving on to number 3, so far we have had several incidents involving Afghan refugees at 2 U.S. bases, Fort McCoy in Wisconsin and Fort Bliss in Texas. There have been other incidents that are not yet public, so we can't comment on those just yet, but 2 Afghan refugees that were brought here as part of the Afghanistan evacuation have been indicted federally at Fort McCoy. One for attempting to force himself on a child, and the other for attempting to suffocate his wife. These are 2 separate incidents with people that they're not related or anything. There's also been a third incident that is currently under investigation by the FBI, in which a female U.S. service member was assaulted by several Afghan males. This event occurred in the refugee tent city in Fort Bliss, Texas. As far as commenting on this, there really isn't that much intel value except to point out that this is a direct side effect of the hectic nature of the evacuations. So for those of you that did not follow our briefings during the Afghanistan evacuation, one of the unfortunate things that happened was the evacuation of unvetted people. And this is kind of a delicate thing to talk about, but it turns out that a lot of people that we evacuated weren't super great people. A lot of the people that we evacuated happened to be what would be, even for Afghan society, considered to be freeloaders who just wanted to get a handout from the U.S. government and weren't actually in threat of being killed by the Taliban. For those of you who have been to Afghanistan and you know what we're talking about here, we all know that there's a certain group of any real society, I guess no matter where the military base is at in the world, but it just happens to be in Afghanistan as well, people that hang around the base, try to get as much free stuff as they can from the government while they can. And a lot of those people were the people that ended up on flights. So Plus, there is the completely atrocious parts of Afghan culture that we cannot talk about here because we try to be as family friendly as possible in these briefings. But every soldier, again, who's been to Afghanistan knows exactly what I'm talking about. So when you combine all of this stuff together, the culture, the evacuation, the need for the Biden administration to pump up numbers, even people who might not have deserved a trip out of that country to here, all of these things adding up together mean that you're going to have incidents like this. We saw this coming. We saw this. We saw this and talked about it during the evacuation, and now we're seeing the results of this. Moving on to number 4, New York is in a pickle. The state government has created a worker shortage in the healthcare industry by mandating the jab. So what New York is dealing with right now is a medical crisis of their own creation, which they freely admit to creating. This is not just me being biased. This is something they admit to. They mandated the jab for healthcare workers. A lot of healthcare workers left the job, or they quit. And now there's a shortage of healthcare workers. Allegedly, so much of a shortage that the governor is planning to call up the National Guard to staff hospitals. Now, one might ask, instead of calling up the National Guard, why not just get rid of the mandates and bring those people back that quit? Well, that would certainly be the preferable option from a strategic standpoint, but the past couple of years have certainly been a time for governors to use the National Guard as they see fit. So who knows? I just wanted to point this out in case you end up needing medical care in New York. You might find that your doctor is a soldier in the near future due to the shortage of healthcare workers. And moving on to number 5, kind of moving back to Afghanistan too, the FBI they've publicly released that they are investigating certain veteran groups who were working to rescue people from Afghanistan that the U.S. government left behind. The FBI has launched an official investigation and made visits to individual residences of people and groups who worked to get Americans back home. For us, this is completely unsurprising. As we have stated many times in our Afghanistan series, the U.S. government is trying to cover up leaving Americans behind and is targeting anyone who tried to help get Americans out. No witness is no crime, right? So the U.S. government is working around the clock to make sure that as few people make it home as possible. Again, something that we pointed out as being a huge problem in our Afghanistan series. And number 6, I briefly wanted to touch on the border crisis just to remind people that it does in fact still exist. It's still a huge problem. We have observed a significant propaganda effort to slander the Border Patrol agents down there, with the whole photo scandal that was completely fabricated. Border Patrol agents never whipped anybody, and the video and other photos of the event have shown that this is a complete and utter lie. Even the guy who took the photo that the White House has been pushing and their minions have been pushing on social media, the dude who took the photo said he never saw anybody whipping anyone. So that's really pretty much the update on that, just to kind of dispel that never happened, right? And there's a lot of propaganda, and the fact that the illegal immigration problem, this immediate crisis, as specifically, is still a massive problem, and the Biden administration has been quietly letting in the very same people that they said they would send back to their host nations. So pretty much the status quo on that front. And moving into a new slide, I wanted to briefly talk about some developing technologies. I know this is going to be kind of hard to work into the normal rotation of things, but I did want to talk about it because there's a lot of new gadgets and technologies that are coming out that I think are worth knowing about at least. The first one is this new SATCOM detector. So this is a new detector that is, you can read all this technical data about it, at least the technical data that is public about it, in the sources, but this is a new detection device that can detect and pinpoint sat phone calls from the Iridium network, the Thuraya network, and the Inmarsat network. Now, of course, sat phone interception tools have been used for years, so this is nothing new. It's just this particular one is new, so that's kind of interesting. Moving on to number 2 is the Shadow Dragon surveillance software. So this, again, is something that is currently being used. It's actually kind of old. This has been around for kind of a while, but I did want to mention it because it's gotten a lot a lot of press lately. Actually, the article that is the source for this, the primary like company that is outraged about this software, is The Intercept. And if you read the article, it is full of very biased language. I'll say it like that. But in any case, basically the Shadow Dragon surveillance software is just a suite of software tools. It's like Palantir. For those guys out there who are analysts and have used this stuff, it's like Palantir. It's actually more closely aligned to like Analyst Notebook from way back in the day. Um, but yeah, it's just a social media aggregator. It has a lot of different sources and tools. Very powerful tool, and it turns out most police groups in the United States are using this or something like this. So yeah, something to be aware of. It's very interesting how the whole thing works, and the Intercept article's got some interesting stuff about it. But again, just be advised, it's not really easy to read. So yeah, I thought that would be kind of interesting to talk about. Also, the Mark 22 sniper rifle continues its development. The Fort Bragg PAO just put out a few pictures of it. So it underwent some airborne testing a couple weeks ago, in which they wanted to make sure that it actually maintained its accuracy after the jostling of a jump, static line deployment. So that's kind of interesting. It's going to be probably fielded pretty soon if it isn't already in the hands of some special dudes doing special things, as it already has been for at least a couple of years now, I think. And one of the more cool ones, I think, to talk about is the new MC-130 Juliet variant, the Commando 2 amphibious variant, specifically of the C-130 airframe. So basically, this is a C-130 Hercules, or really the MC-130, that they're going to put some gigantic floats on so that it can be amphibious. Now, this is kind of interesting because this is AFSOC requesting this, of course. But the fact that we're trying to shift to the Pacific, the great Pacific pivot, right, that a lot of military analysts are talking about. This is one of those things, right? Being able to land at some of these smaller atolls, and we're trying to repeat a lot of the doctrine. We're kind of going back to that World War II conflict against Japan, right, the war in the Pacific there, and looking at a lot of the lessons learned. And geography hasn't changed at all since World War II, so technology has to change in order to provide the capabilities we need for that conflict. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Also, it's in really the later stages of development. They're actually going to have this is going from drawing board to full scale demonstration in 17 months. So that's a fast track program. That's why I wanted to talk about it. This is moving quick for such a program. So, again, the Special Forces community has been very interested in using the C-130 airframe for very specific things in the past, and they have fast-tracked other airframes as well. But this is an interesting one to keep in mind and to be on the lookout for if you happen to see one in testing. And moving on to number 5, this one is really kind of the cat's out of the bag, so I guess we can kind of talk about it now, considering it's all over the internet at this point. Um, a huge, a gigantic OPSEC violation resulted in a worker or some personnel or somebody taking a video and posting on TikTok of one of our stealth aircraft that was undergoing testing at the Helendale Radar Cross Section facility. So yeah, nothing is known about it other than this video coming out, but it is very interesting design, and it's raising a lot of eyebrows around the internet just because of how futuristic it looks. But again, this is probably not something that is anywhere close to being developed. If they're still undergoing the radar cross-section analysis, then it's probably early on in its phase of development. But interesting thing to note moving forward, I guess. And finally, is something that is sure to creep a lot of people out. This is a flying microchip. So, Northwestern University has created the smallest ever human made flying object, which is essentially a flying microchip. So, I'm not sure if you can actually see it or not, but there is a whole pile of these things right here. And this is, of course, in size reference to a carpenter ant. They're smaller than some of these grains of sand. So there's one there, there, and there. Um, yeah, very interesting. Now I know this is talking about anything that's small and flying and potentially a collection asset is surely to ignite the most interesting parts of the internet. I guess I'll say it that way. But this is purely conceptual. Sure, they've made them and it does appear to work. But again, I'm not exactly looking around the room for these little particles of dust that are flying around with cameras on them just yet. So, yes, there is a demonstration. Yes, this is a proof of concept essentially, but it's not like this is going to become a mainstream thing even within the next year or two. This is a long-term thing as we try to make sensors that are smaller and smaller and smaller. The government agencies making these are going to have a harder and harder time getting things as compact as possible. So again, something interesting I thought I'd touch on, and yeah, I guess we'll keep an eye on some of these developing technologies and see how they shake out over the next few weeks and years, I guess. Moving on to the public school attendance mask mandate tracker map. So really there have been a couple of updates, not too many, but really the two biggest ones are Florida and Texas. So Florida, most large school districts now require masks, directly going against the governor's orders, which is a trend that we've been observing for a long time. It seems that on the government level, particularly when it comes to these mandates, that politically liberal officials and agencies in conservative states are 100% willing to fight their conservative governors and openly not complying with their orders, but the reverse is not true. So conservative officials, local governments, and agencies and entities in liberal states are certainly not willing to fight their liberal political leadership in the more liberal states. Certainly not as much as liberals are willing to fight conservatives on issues like this. So I wanted to point this out because it's something to keep in mind as these maps start getting blurry over the next few days and weeks, right? Same situation in Texas. Mask mandates are banned, right? But that ban was overturned by a court or by a judge who's put a temporary hold on it. And also, about 85% of all the school districts in Texas require masks. So there you go. And that trend applies to pretty much all states right now. This slide isn't great. I don't like the way this slide is depicting things because it looks like the states that are gray, it kind of looks like there's nothing going on there. But just as a baseline, almost all states, actually, I think every state at this point has a mask mandate in their most populated cities, in their capital cities, or really even just their largest school districts. So I just wanted to point that out, that even though there might not be a mandate on the state level, every single state has at least one very large school district, usually the biggest school district in the state, in which masks are mandated. So, and as far as other changes from the last brief, Tennessee, two judges teamed up together to block the mask mandate ban. And the same thing happened in Oklahoma. A temporary injunction was issued there to stop their mandate ban. On the other end of the spectrum, South Carolina is actually doing pretty good. They look like they're charging forward ahead faster than anybody else. Their Supreme Court upheld the ban on mandates at the state level, so that will deal a significant blow to the mandate makers in South Carolina for a while. Although local districts can and still do mandate masks on their own, it's just that it's prohibited at the state level, and it's backed up by the South Carolina Supreme Court. Moving on to the jab mandate tracker, really no updates at all to this slide. California is still the only state where it's mandated for students K through 12 to receive the medical procedure. So I'm just going to push forward into the medical resistance tracker. There's only been a couple of updates. Really, Arkansas is the biggest one. Again, Arkansas is in that weird situation where the governor has verbally stated that he is in favor of medical mandates, but he's just upset that it's the federal government doing it and not anybody on a lower level, such as himself or company by company, I guess. So we expect similar sentiments to work their way out over the next few weeks as we see what other mandates are coming down the pipeline. Remember, we still haven't really seen anything tangible to give us an indication of the exact wording of these mandates that will be coming from OSHA. So right now, a lot of the states that are claiming to resist don't really have anything to grab onto with a lawsuit just yet. Everybody's pretty much in wait and see mode for now. with only a few states going out of the way to provide a blanket of laws that will prevent whatever the regime comes up with from being enforced. And moving on to international issues, I'm going to move through these quite quickly because there is a lot of stuff to talk about. So, first up is the medical stuff, getting that kind of out of the way. So, Australia, New Zealand, and France, we're seeing significant resistance to the medical mandates and really government overreach at this point. And those demonstrations are certainly escalating as the days go by. Some nations, such as Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, have actually backpedaled. Sweden and Norway announced their recovery from the pandemic, and Denmark has actually done the same, but also reclassified the virus as something that is no greater threat than the flu. So, for some nations, their governments are doubling down on the restrictions, and in other nations, they are treating it like it's over. So that's interesting as time goes on. Moving over to Southeast Asia, the coup in Myanmar is escalating quite significantly as a military junta there tries to drill down its control even further. There's been quite a bit of resistance in Burma throughout the past few months, but this military coup situation will probably have follow-on effects for a long time. And moving forward into Africa, into the Sahel region, specifically Mali, the Long Range Reconnaissance Group is at it again. Most people might know them as the LRDG, or the Long Range Desert Group. The SES has been very active in North Africa, and the Long Range Reconnaissance Group has specifically been conducting a lot of long range missions that are very much an homage to their heritage throughout North Africa, really. And this is due to the fight against ISIS being quite significant throughout Mali and Niger as we move forward into the winter season. Although lately, the past few years, we've seen a pretty significant fighting season continue throughout the winter, basically a year-round fighting season for most of the ISIS militants that try to maintain control of Africa. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, why are you talking about Africa constantly? Well, because it's a huge theater, and because a lot of people have a lot of interest in Africa. China has built a a serious amount of bases there. They've built a lot of roads in exchange for mineral rights. It is it's not the next frontier, but it is a major goal for a lot of powers around the world. And, we keep constantly having Green Berets get killed in Africa in places where the American public isn't even aware that that's where we are. So the United States has a presence there. Obviously, the Brits have a good presence there. The French actually just had one of their soldiers killed in the same theater. So Africa is certainly relevant, mostly for the mineral wealth. Most of the minerals that are required to make things like smartphones, we're talking things like coltan and nickel and cobalt and bauxite and things like that. Those elements have to come from somewhere. Sure, the devices are made in China, but the elements that are used to make the devices come from Africa for the most part. So that's why Africa is such a huge deal, and that's why China wants to invest heavily in Africa as much as they can. A lot of mineral wealth they can export back. They can avoid the natural resource curse that pretty much every African nation has suffered from. Nations with large amounts of mineral wealth tend to do pretty poorly economically, even though it sounds counterproductive. This is called the natural resource curse, which you can read more about on your own. But the case in point is that a lot of these nations are exporting their stuff. So China is very much interested in Africa, and so is everyone else. Jumping back to Europe, the United Kingdom, our friends across the pond are not doing so well when it comes to shortages of things. Now, everyone has that magic B word, right? Brexit on their minds these days, and it seems to be like a lot of the logistical problems are kind of caused by Brexit, but also not really. So, driver shortages, yeah, you could point it back to Brexit at some point. Everything it comes back to any kind of shaking up of the logistical supply network of a nation is going to have results. So that's why you have things like driver shortages. They have gasoline shortages. Gasoline rationing is still happening. From last brief, that's still going on. You've got a CO2 shortage. So in the UK, they use CO2 mainly for the creation of things like, of course, beverage production, but also for the humane killing of animals, the slaughtering of animals for meat, and that's already hitting the meat industry. So It's not that there's a shortage of beef; it's just there's a shortage of the chemicals needed to, humanely dispatch those animals, right? So, which drives production down, and there you go. So the United Kingdom as a whole, we know that they're not doing super hot when it comes to logistics right now. And jumping back to South Korea, they have, of course, as almost immediately after the last briefing, in which we talked about their new launches and the sort of mini arms race that's going on between the North and the South right now. They have released or released footage of their new anti-ship cruise missile. So it's a hypersonic missile. So huge technological development for them, of course. They got outside help. So if you actually look at the missile itself, it looks very similar to some Russian missiles. So interesting, South Korea is continuing their missile tests. We'll of course see something from the North, if we haven't already, that we just missed. Something from the North is going to happen. Probably another missile test or something. That's how an arms race works. So something to keep an eye on. If you happen to see North Korea's done something, this is probably why. And moving forward to Russia. So, for those that don't track Russian politics, Russia recently had an election. And if you look at a lot of the things that are being said online, a lot of people are saying that it could not have been more fraudulent if they tried. So, we're talking about all kinds of things, like people recording the actual digital voting screen thing, changing their vote, the number of votes being changed. So Alexei Navalny's old political outfit was like hugely in the lead at one point, and then like 60 seconds before the voting polls closed, Putin's party jumped to the lead with like 90% of the vote. So, the classic stuff we keep hearing, and stuff that eerily rings true here in the United States as well, as we question our own electoral process. So, very interesting. It's kind of hilarious to see the things that are coming out about the Russian election, but you guys can go check that out on your own. I just think it's quite interesting to note that Russia and the ruling elite are still up to their old tricks, just like expected. And moving to Austria, or really, I suppose technically the United States as well, so U.S. and Austria, the CIA station chief in Vienna has been ousted from her job among accusations that she did not report any sort of incidents involving Havana syndrome. So, for those of you who have not been following our discussions on Havana syndrome, this is it is an illness that was first thought to be a myth a few years ago. It's been around for, gosh, I think the first time I heard about Havana syndrome was about 10 years ago. But basically, it's a mysterious illness with it's got symptoms like nausea, headaches, tinnitus, things like that. So people are exhibiting real symptoms, but there's no indication, there's no toxins in their system. They pass a full medical evaluation, and so Havana syndrome is very much a mysterious thing, even among the highest levels of our intelligence agencies. They've gotten a lot more evidence about it, what they think it might be now, but back in the day, what's become public knowledge, I suppose, and safe to talk about is most people think it has something to do with some kind of electromagnetic weapon, some kind of ray gun, or some kind of directed energy weapon, DEW, that is causing these kinds of things. Some kind of microwave weapon is what was theorized at one point. Others think it's some kind of X-ray or something to do with the electromagnetic spectrum. So that's kind of the general thinking about Havana syndrome right now. And a lot of diplomats have reported it because it, of course, surfaced in Havana, Cuba, of diplomats. Not every diplomat who lives in a country, is a representative of the United States. They don't all live inside the embassy. They live outside the embassy. So workers would report getting sick, and this started happening all over the planet. And it turns out, bringing it back to Austria, in Vienna, they had more cases than anywhere else combined. So there you go. And the CIA station chief there was covering that up, or downplaying it, like so many diplomats have downplayed it over the years. But it's clearly a real thing. People are really getting sick. As to who is doing this, the classic finger pointing is, of course, Russia, our number one diplomatic adversary. It sounds like a Russian thing to do. That's kind of along kind of along the lines of the Cold War tricks they used to do. But then again, the United States is also perfectly capable of doing these attacks on ourselves as well. So who really knows, right? Unless you're the director of the CIA, you're not going to know the full story of any of this stuff, and even then, you might not know. So I thought it was kind of interesting. It brings back this Havana syndrome medical thing back into the press for people to kind of sink their teeth into, and it's sort of from our side of things. It kind of triggers us, even here as a civilian group, right? It triggers us into thinking, okay, well, is this is going to be a huge deal a few years down the line, because we've already seen how in just a few short years it's gone from being a myth to a very serious thing, and we're trying, and it's one of those things that, like, once you get down into the weeds of, well, how would you stop it? How would you prevent something like this? It gets very difficult to do. So I just wanted to point that out for those that are interested in Havana syndrome. And moving on to China. So China not doing super hot. They're still working through the problems with the Evergrande crisis. Their economy is seriously in trouble. I guess we'll see how this plays out in the Asian markets, which are not doing super hot right now either way. But it looks like China is going to have some serious economic problems for the foreseeable future. Finally, ending on Bahrain. Sorry, it's too small to show on the map, but I just wanted to briefly mention the new cooperation, the new partnership between Bahrain and the U.S. Navy, in which they're going to start patrolling together a lot more. So, for those that don't know, Bahrain's a small little island kind of nation out there next to Saudi Arabia off the coast there, and it's really just a big U.S. Navy base. It is its own nation; they have their own stuff, but it's really one of those diplomatically weird places to describe. But they do have a navy; they do have a coastal defense thing, and they have quite a few ships. So we're going to be United States is going to be conducting a lot more exercises with them throughout the rest of the Gulf region quite soon. And that's pretty much all I've got for today. Thank you again to everyone for watching, and a special thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon. I know we've gotten kind of a burst of people supporting us over there, so just wanted to thank you all again for that. It really does help with our rising costs here as we start to put out more and more content. And moving on to our sources, kind of got a lot for this week. So there's slide 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 slides on sources. So you guys can pause and either manually type these in, or you can check out the link below, which will have the PDF of these slides uploaded to Odyssey, where you can actually get the clickable link. So if you wanted to research more, which we would recommend. So once again, thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.